I am back, and we are comfortably zoned from Alameda, California, 420 studio down by the Lagoon in Alameda. And I have a very special guest today, an Atlanta Brave fan. This is going to be about the Braves and paying a little homage to three guys going into the Hall of Fame, plus their manager in 1 year, Smoltz, Glavine, and Smoltz,
Bobby Cox,
Glavine, and yes, Maddox. I'm joined from Florida. We're bi-coastal today, by Zach Stewart. How you doing, Zach?
You're going in and out, Zig.
Great. I'm joined in Florida by Zach Stewart, who's an Atlanta Brave aficionado. Zach, can you hear me?
You were going in and out. It's a little bit better now.
All right. Well, thank you. And we're doing what we can to make podcast radio a viable force. This is the station that does it, and we talk the real schlemiel, as it were. And as I was saying, I really want to pay homage today to the Atlanta Braves and their manager, Bobby Cox, along with three incredibly talented pitchers, Smoltz, Glavine, and Maddox, all going into the Hall of Fame. And
well, actually, Smoltz isn't eligible till next year.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought he was going in this year as well.
Nope, Glavine and Maddox are in this year. Smoltz is eligible next year.
Okay. Well, Smoltz was my favorite of all of them because his versatility. Smoltz was not only a starter for a lot of years, but he became an excellent relief pitcher and helped the Braves do something that's really unprecedented. And if they were in a New York team, they would get more credit. I think, would they win 10 divisions in a row?
14.
14 divisions in a row. Okay, imagine that. And they did manage to win one world championship with Pendleton and the boys. And another one of my favorites, Lemke, was the shortstop, if I'm not mistaken, on that team. But
second base, actually.
Oh, second base. Okay. Boy, an old man and his memories fade very fast. Tell me about being a Brave fan in those times, and then we'll talk a little bit, too, about someone who's not pretty much assured unless he's elected by the Veterans Committee. He was a player when you were a real kid, first discovering baseball, and that's Dale Murphy, who had a tremendous career. So tell me a little bit about why you chose the Braves. I think you were living in Georgia at that time. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, and actually I lived in Florida from 1980 until 86. So I moved to Florida when I was 5. And back in those days, the Braves were the Florida team because, the Marlins didn't come around until 93. The Rays didn't show up until 98. The Braves owned the Southeast as far as baseball goes. And on top of that, of course, they were on TBS. Yeah, they were on TBS across the country every day because, in truth, Ted Turner had bought TBS in the mid-'70s, sold his father's billboard company to buy a TV station, and he needed to fill broadcasting time. And at the time, of course, sports franchises were not nearly as valuable, or were as they are now, or I guess I could say that back then they were undervalued. And he was able to buy the Braves, and it gave him basically, 3 to 4 hours of programming a night for half the year. So that's why he bought them, and they wound up being huge because even though they weren't a great team, they were televised everywhere.
And they were called, like the Dallas Cowboys, America's team.
Sure, well, yeah.
Yeah, because of the cable thing. Cable was first coming in. and that caused the explosion. And Ted Turner himself was quite a character. I don't know if you remember that he actually went on the field in uniform and managed for a game.
I remember, and then the commissioner told him never to do that again.
Right. I think he was suspended for a while, but he was a character and what they call a maverick in today's day and age.
Well, back in those days, it was owners weren't weren't quite so corporate. They were, generally speaking, a lot more tied to the team, and you had your Steinbrenners, your Veeks, owners who were very much public personalities.
I get to say this. It was the title of a book. It's called Veck as in Wreck. That was the title of the book. So Bill Veck, who you're referring to, he reads like Veek, but another maverick in his day, without corporate ties, running it by the...
Even out by you had Charlie Finley.
Right, another character who was... Up
there in the Bay Area.
Could do a show about Charlie Finley, and in 72, 3, and 4, they won world championships. So that was considered the last dynasty. As far as I'm concerned, the Braves are a dynasty. You win 14 years in a row, you're a dynasty. Tell me a little bit about your memories of Bobby Cox.
Well, I lived in Atlanta from 86 until I went off to college, and then I spent another few years there after college. And Bobby, I do remember being amazed. I was in high school when it happened, and where the general manager, it was the first time I'd ever heard of such a thing, where the general manager fired the manager and named himself manager. And I'm sure it had happened previous times in history, but it was the first time I'd ever heard of such a thing happening. Of course, right. Bobby had been... He
was the general manager before
right.
being the manager, obviously, yes.
And he, of course, before he'd become the Braves general manager, he'd been a manager for the Braves and for the Blue Jays. So he obviously had significant managerial experience. But right. I think that the best analogy that I can make actually comes from a few years later with the Miami Heat. By a few years later, I mean 15, 20 or so years later, where Pat Riley assembled a bunch of talent, Dwayne Wade, Shaquille O'Neal, etc., and then said, you know what, why am I sitting up here in the office? I'm coaching this group. And he got rid of Stan Van Gundy left to spend time with his family. We all know what that means. And... Right. And I think that's what Bobby Cox said. He said, geez, I put together this awesome farm system. We got a lot of young talent. What am I doing sitting up here in an office? And right. So he got rid of Russ.
Guy who's been on the field all that time. He's got to have his hand in it some way.
Right.
Yeah.
He figured he assembled all that talent. He wanted, he bought all the toys. He wanted to play with them. So at that point, and right in that time frame, that was when you had Glavine coming up through the system. He had been with the Braves since '87. He had been in the majors since '87, and they had recently in '87 they acquired Smoltz as a minor league player.
Right.
They had several other young Ron Gant, David Justice won a Rookie of the Year award.
This was terrific for a long time. So
yeah,
power hitting, very small little guy and a power hitting. Packed a lot of muscle. Big Gant. And Pendleton?
Well, they signed Pendleton as a free agent after Cox went back to the field. But, that team, Terry Pendleton was the missing piece for that team.
Right.
Without a doubt. That was the 1991 team. Pendleton came in as a free agent from St. Louis, which has... even today they say it's the best organization in baseball. Back then it was still being run at it's always been run at a very, very high level. And Pendleton came in with winning expectations. And that was really, really important because the Braves had a lot of talented players, but they didn't have anyone that knew how to win.
Now, was Sherholtz the general manager by then? Or did
yes,
Bobby
he was.
Cox...
When Cox dumped Russ Nixon, I believe it was 1990, and went back to the field. And then they brought in John Sherholtz from Kansas City to be the general manager. And one of Sherholtz's first moves was, of course, drafting a guy named Larry Jones out of Florida, and he went on to a pretty good career with the Braves too.
Yes, Larry, they call him, huh?
Yeah, that's his given name. Larry Wayne Jones Jr.
The one thing I admire about Chipper Jones is that he went through his entire career, as did Dale Murphy, with no controversy whatsoever.
Well, never anything that was highly publicized in the national media, certainly. Chipper did get in a little bit of trouble in the mid-'90s where he had an out-of-wedlock child with a Hooters waitress, which, in all honesty, I know this because it happened in West Palm Beach where the Braves had spring training. And, of course, I'm talking to you from West Palm Beach. And I know about 10 years ago I was friends with the guy who was the manager of the Hooters at the time it happened. So I know about it.
Okay.
But it's not. And let's be honest. In today's market, a star athlete having an affair and an out of wedlock child is hardly front page news.
Right, hardly. I mean, guys are doing things today that you couldn't even imagine existed being done back then.
Right. Or it got done back then and it just didn't get out. Yeah.
Right. And we've deteriorated as a society. Either that or the press has increased their coverage, because I don't think things have changed as much as reputed. It's just that the press didn't cover things back in the golden age of baseball when there was a lot of activity.
in the golden age of journalism, back then when beat writers would follow teams, they were reluctant to write negative things about players because, let's be honest, they needed the players to talk to them so that they could write their stories. Right.
And they were in cahoots with, basically, in cahoots with ownership to publicize. The best publicity came from the newspapers, and they knew it too. And so one hand
washed the other. Sure.
Right. What do you think the difference that Leo Mazzoni made? Am I pronouncing it? Is it Mazzone or Mazzoni?
It's Mazzoni. Yeah.
Okay.
I think one of the worst days in Braves history was when Leo left to go join the Baltimore organization. And in all honesty, he didn't have a particularly stellar career with Baltimore, but Baltimore's been in the dumps for decades, as we know.
Right.
But I think more than anything else, what speaks to how good a job Leo Mazzoni did as the pitching coach for the Braves was the fact that Glavine, Maddox, and Smoltz hardly ever missed a start. Those guys, and whoever else was taking the fourth and fifth spots, with a few exceptions. Obviously, Steve Avery was essentially a baseball tragedy, a guy with tremendous talent who hurt his arm and was never the same. But the reliability of their starters was ridiculous. I mean, those guys went out and just did it year after year after year, making 30 starts a year. And after Mazzoni left, quite frankly, and over the last 5 or 6 years, the Braves by far lead all of Major League Baseball in guys having Tommy John surgery.
Really?
Yeah. I saw that statistic earlier this year. You know how this year people have been talking consistently about how many young pitchers are having surgery. Well, the Braves have had more than anybody else by a wide margin, counting both the majors and the minors. It's been absolutely sick how many pitchers the Braves have lost to arm problems.
I think that's all because of the pitch count. I think if you built up the strength, that wouldn't be happening.
Well, actually, what they're saying is the opposite. The problem is that at the high school and college level, the coaches know that by the time this kid blows his arm out, he's going to be long gone. So there's no benefit to conserving his arm. The coach needs
to do too much with the kid too early. Is that it?
Yeah, right. Well, and they, you know what? Unlike when I was growing up, when I was in high school, your star athletes, they played all the sports. They played in season. And now what you see is a kid that likes baseball and is talented at baseball, he's playing baseball all year round. He moves to Florida or he moves to California or he moves to Texas, and he plays baseball all year round, which means that a kid that maybe used to just pitch for 4 months a year, now he's pitching 8 months a year. And there's only so many bullets in the gun, so to speak.
Right.
I just pulled up Greg Maddox's career, and I'm looking at his game started from 1996 to 2006. So 11 seasons. Over 11 seasons, Greg Maddox never started fewer than 33 games.
Wow.
That and in the modern era, that's insane. That's insane. And I mean, we're not talking about in 1972 with 4-man rotations. We're talking about the same 5-man rotations that you have now, and the guy started a minimum of 33. It was between 33 and 36 games every single year for 11 consecutive seasons.
Whoa.
Nobody will do that anymore.
Which brings to mind another consistent guy with the Braves we talked about earlier is Murphy, and I took the liberty of bringing up some stats earlier on today. This guy averaged 30 home runs, 90 ribbies, 5 ribbies, because it's RBI, not RBIs, but 5 Golden Gloves, played 162 games. That's all the games from 82 to 85, 4 years. I mean, it's not Pete Rose, but it's or Ripken, but it's damn good. 7-year All-Star, and he won the MVP twice. And he's one of those guys like Gil Hodges, who's up for the final vote coming up this year by the Veterans Committee, who is just on the cusp of getting in there. His batting average is considerably lower than you might expect. He struck out a lot. But this guy was consistent as hell for like 16 years on a losing. He didn't have much support around him. And I wonder what he would have done, say, if he was in the middle of a lineup with guys like Gant. And
where he had some protection, where his protection wasn't guys broken down stars from the 70s or guys who never were, used to be's and almost were's. He never had anything around him, basically. I think what's hurt him more than anything else in the Hall of Fame discussion is
that he never had an affair with the Hooters waitress and had a kid.
Well,
I mean, they're holding that against him now.
Well, I'll talk about that kind of stuff in a minute. The guy's perfect, but in that regard, but his peak, I think a lot of people say his peak wasn't long enough, and I think if Jay Jaffe, who writes for Sports Illustrated, has a statistic, and I'm not a huge fan of all the sabermetrics arguments, the statistical arguments. I completely understand them. They make sense to me. If I was a general manager of a baseball team, without a doubt, I would be addicted to those kind of statistics.
The one they call WAR, WAR,
wins above replacement,
is a terrific statistic. It really is.
It is. But what I don't like about I find that with so many advanced statistics to choose from, I find that people become a bit too obsessive about the statistic, and they kind of lose the poetry that is the game.
That's very well put. That's Boswell-like. in your expression. Yes, because it is a poetic game. It does flow, and there's something to it that goes beyond the numbers, the intangibles that people forget. And for that reason, I really like Murphy.
Yeah. Well, there's always. I think what drives me nuts about Murphy not making the Hall of Fame on the vote is that it reveals a great deal of hypocrisy by the voters. And what I mean by that is, according to the rules of the Hall of Fame, voters are only allowed to consider what happens on the field. You know what I'm saying? They're supposed to account for the impact on the game itself, not anything off the field.
Well, with that in mind, Clemens and Bonds would have been in first ballot.
Of course. Well, and that's kind of what my point is. It's that, and yet these same guys are making the argument that they won't vote for McGwire, Bonds, Sosa, Palmeiro, Clemens, because they were, at the very least, they are accused or suspected steroids users, at the least.
At the least, exactly.
Well, at the least, they are accused users of steroids, and they're saying that was, but that's off. In all honesty, that is off the field behavior. They weren't sticking needles in their butts out at second base.
No, but according to Canseco, in his book, they were doing it in the hall of the dugout, between the dugout and the clubhouse.
I was thinking about that earlier today, how Jose Canseco is kind of like the anti-Lance Armstrong. With Lance Armstrong, everyone in biking was saying he's dirty, and he was fighting tooth and nail that he wasn't. And with Canseco, he was saying everybody's dirty, and they were fighting tooth and nail saying, no, we're not. And it turns out Canseco was telling the truth the whole time.
They never caught Canseco in a lie about it, which is,
nope.
I mean, everything he said in the book was true. The only thing that was disputed, you're talking about, I think it was the catcher, not Rodriguez, the guy with Texas, Pudge Rodriguez.
Pudge Rodriguez, yeah.
He's denied it entirely, but then again, Palmeiro denied it entirely.
Yeah.
McGwire didn't want to talk about it in a congressional hearing, which is about as hypocritical as anything. The Congress, the United States Congress, has the balls to judge whoever it is. Yes, you did wrong. Well, Mr. Congressman, let me just talk to you a little bit. But let me just add one thing about McGwire. I don't think McGwire is Hall of Fame material, whether or not he ever did it. He did break the record, but Maris broke a record, and he never made the Hall of Fame. And I think McGwire's numbers don't get him in there. And
it used to be the 500 home run threshold. Is what it always used to be.
That's true. But
he got the 500 home run.
But that was obviously affected by the juice. There's no question about that. And ironically, some of the injuries that he had were because his joints and ligaments couldn't hold the bulk of weight
he was putting on.
Wasn't putting on. So sometimes steroids will help someone recover from injury faster, but sometimes if you put on too much bulk, it can hurt you. So whether or not, how to judge it, I'd say let them all in, those who you think would have made it. Just put an asterisk by the name that played in an era when it was just assumed that
everyone
was doing it. I don't know how else to handle it, because it's hypocritical, even not having Shoeless Joe Jackson and Rose.
Of course. Well, here's my question about Shoeless Joe. He was given a lifetime ban. Well, the guy's dead. Put him in.
Right. It's not going to bring him back. It's not.
Whose lifetime are we talking about? The lifetime of Major League Baseball?
Right.
But Well, to bring it back to Murphy, there are guys that are specifically saying they're not going to vote for suspected steroid cheats because of stuff because of their perceived lack of integrity. Well, if you're going to consider that guy's perceived lack of integrity and whether or not you vote for him, shouldn't Murphy get points? The man is a saint.
Right.
He's very active in his church, regardless of what you happen to think of Mormonism. The man served with his church for years and years. When I was in Atlanta, he was a fixture at showing up at children's hospitals and kids functions and you name it. He was if it was positive, he was supporting it. The man was known for never drinking anything other than water or milk, for God's sake.
No soda, no coffee, because that's part of the
because he's a Mormon, yeah.
Right. But there are those that cheat on that too, so you have to preface everything by saying, as far as we know.
Right.
But I'll accept the fact that there was a clean guy. And so it comes down to the fact that it's all pretty much objective, and
his numbers don't measure up to most right fielders, ultimately. I think part of what hurt him, and the truth of it is, and this is what's a little bit sad about it, the voters tend to look at career numbers, and why wouldn't you? I mean, it's much easier to look at one line on a resume than 20. But if he had retired a Brave, they traded him to Philadelphia in 1990.
Right, he spent 2 or 3 years with Philadelphia and Colorado, not doing very much.
Correct, and they were terrible years. His peak, the only real year that he did anything after the trade was with Philadelphia in 91. He played 153 games. He batted .252, which actually in 91, that was big offensive surge, wasn't horrible, but he only had a .309 on-base percentage and a .415 slugging, so it's not like he was setting the world on fire. In 153 games, he had 18 homers and 81 RBIs. Not a terrible year, but certainly not a good one. But all people really remember is how broken down he was in 92 and 93. And I think those last couple of years where he hit a combined .150, I think that ultimately really hurt him. And I really do wish that, when the Braves had come to him in 1990, I know they moved him to make room for David Justice, who was coming up from the minor leagues, wound up winning Rookie of the Year. I wish that they had found a way to, keep him with the team and let him retire. I'm sure that he didn't want to retire because, in truth, he finished with 398 career home runs. And I think that he really wanted to. Yeah, I really think he was going for 400. And also, a lot of people don't realize this. In the 1980s, Murphy had the second most home runs in all of Major League Baseball. He finished only like two homers behind Mike Schmidt. So I really do think that he wanted to hang on and maybe get to that magic 400 number. But his peak was pretty short there in the mid-'80s, and his decline was really, really quick. And that really hurt him. I think in 87, people forget, because 87 was a juiced ball year. That was the year where Andre Dawson somehow managed to win the MVP playing for the last-place Cubs.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about, yeah.
I do.
He hit 49 home runs. It's like, yeah, but everybody hit 40 home runs in 1987.
Right.
And
that was the first year, as far as I'm concerned, that was the first year of steroids, when it really became prevalent.
And it didn't take off until the 90s, but yeah.
Yeah, Ken Caminiti was MVP that year.
Well, No, in 90, Caminiti was MVP around, not 87, no. 87 was the year Dawson won it, Andre Dawson.
No, but I'm talking the American League.
Oh, in the American League, George Bell won it that year. He also had like 49 home runs, 140 RBIs. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Who? George Bell? Yeah.
Yeah.
Caminiti won it with San Diego in like 93, 94, something like that. No, wait, no, it was later than that. Caminetti was won it with San Diego in '98, I think.
He didn't
That
win
was
it
the year
with
San Diego. I'm sorry.
Okay. Again, I stand corrected. That's why I have.
Caminetti, he came up with Houston.
People.
But in '87, Murph hit 44 homers with 105 RBIs, and he had a 997 OPS. I mean, that's a crazy good year. A 997 OPS. That's MVP caliber in today's game, and he finished 11th in the MVP voting that year. How nuts is that?
And he had a good arm, and he was a good fielder. So as far as I'm concerned, the thing that held him back was his strikeouts. And if he, like we talked about before, if he had protection around him, they'd be pitching to him, and he wouldn't have to get his. He wouldn't
be hacking out of the strike zone.
Right, hacking out of the strike zone. So I'm glad to be able to give him his due. I don't think he'll make the Hall of Fame when it comes down to it.
You know what? I hope he does, but I hope it's not a Ron Santo situation.
Right.
Where the Veterans Committee votes him in after he dies. But let's be honest. Santo died of diabetes, and based upon his known eating habits, I somehow doubt Murphy's going to run into that particular issue.
Right. But no one gets out alive.
Right.
So some way down the line, some kid and a veteran 20 years from now will be deciding on some guy who's been dead for 15 years, and they don't always do a good job. The Veterans Committee doesn't always do a good job. There are many stories about guys not getting in, about Gil Hodges not getting in because of Weaver was the head of
the Veterans Committee, right?
Right, in those days, and they had it out in the '69 World Series. And Weaver was a bitter little prick, and he nixed Hodges from getting in. And it took me a long time to get to the position in life where I think Hodges does deserve it. But if you include his managerial stint with, the '69 Mets was literally a miracle that they did it, and the pitching. And the mindset was developed by Hodges so that they could win it so early. He should be in. He played in the middle of a lineup that Murphy would have killed to play with Hodges, and Campanella, and Farillo, and Snyder, and Gilliam, and Reese, and these guys were terrific, and that had to contribute.
Don't forget Robinson.
Oh, yes, Jackie Robinson, who we never got to see. But the proverbial we never got to see Jackie in his prime. He was well past it before. And quite frankly, I think that you talked when players played 5 different sports, Jackie Robinson might have been a better football player than he was a baseball player. Mm-hmm. But wow, he revolutionized. I mean, he took the game where Ricky later took over. Ricky could get on first base and change the complexion of the entire game. Jackie Robinson was the same exact way. I mean,
it was kind of a progression. It went from Jackie Robinson to Lou Brock.
Right.
Ricky Henderson.
Lou Brock, who, ironically, just like Maddox, started out with the Cubs and was traded off by the lowly Cubs. And
Maddox wasn't a trade. Maddox was a free agent.
That's right. That was an early free agent.
That was one of the first big free agent deals, yeah. And everybody said the Braves have good pitching. Why do they need Greg Maddox? Well, there you go.
Yeah. That worked out pretty well. Sometimes you sign a pitcher and it works. Oftentimes you sign a pitcher.
Well, when the Dodgers signed Kershaw to that huge contract this year, I immediately said, well, good for Kershaw, but that at least one of those years he's going to be out with with Tommy John surgery. That seems to be the way it works these days in Major League Baseball. You sign a pitcher to a 7-year deal, you're only getting at best 6 years.
Right.
And yeah, but obviously it worked out for the Braves, without a doubt.
They also look to inflation too, that there'll be more money down the line when you'll be able to buy out the guy's contract, like the Giants did with Zito, for instance.
Right.
So, all in all, putting money into pitching doesn't really work as well as putting money into hitting.
Absolutely. Well, you can't win without decent pitching, but you also can't win every game 1-1 or 2-1. So,
right.
Putting a ton of money into pitching and not having the bats to back it up. If I was a GM, I would much rather spend money on a guy who's going to play 150 games for me than a guy who's going to play in 30.
Right. Now, you were lucky enough to live in the city, being a Braves fan, in the city where they had spring training for many, many years. Give me a spring training memory that you might have, that an interaction with somebody that you cared for, or an interaction with somebody you didn't care for.
Well,
anything come to
because
mind?
when I moved out of Atlanta, I moved to West Palm Beach, where at the time the Braves were having spring training. They were only here for a year or two while I was here, and then they moved up to Disney World. Although there's actually talk of them leaving Disney World and maybe coming back down here. Yeah, and my grandparents lived down here in the South Florida area, so when I'd come down to visit them, if it was during March, I would always make a point of going to a Braves game. And I had several really good experiences with spring training. Spring training, for people who haven't been to it, it is the best experience in professional sports, in my opinion. I covered sports for the Palm Beach Post for 4 years. I've been to a lot of events, and even the World Series, in my opinion, as a fan, doesn't match up to spring training, because in spring training the players are so open and readily available and happy to hang out and sign autographs, and the games themselves don't mean anything ultimately,
right.
but the atmosphere is so much friendlier and collegial, and it's I've been, as a fan, in the last 4 or 5 years, or even longer, going up to seeing the Cardinals in spring training in Jupiter is, I've gone up there and run into some people. Tony La Russa. I talked to Tony La Russa the day after Mark McGwire didn't testify before Congress. That was interesting.
What did he say, just out of curiosity?
Well, he said, I don't know why he didn't just flat out deny it. I know he never did steroids. And looking back, I was actually a news reporter at the time. Looking back in retrospect, it was either Tony with his head in the sand, or Tony just doing his best to defend the indefensible.
It was Tony doing the best to defend the indefensible.
Yeah.
Because you say what you want about Tony La Russa, and I'm not a big fan.
He's loyal to his guys.
He's loyal to his guys. He never misses a beat. He does not. He knows everything that's going on everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
This, not like I say, not a particularly great human being. Loves dogs. Has a foundation for dogs. And I admire that, of course. As your mom is a dog lover, so you've had dogs around all your life. You got to love somebody who loves dogs, and you got to trust that if the dog likes them, that they're a good person. So I'll go with that. But he's made some mistakes as a human in terms of his pitching,
looking the other way at
on and off, doing stuff that you could be a player's manager, but it doesn't really turn out that you're a player's manager if your players are dying off, and so not a guy I
doing
like.
Things
but
things that are
guy,
long-term damage to them. Yeah.
Right, and that's what. See, that's let me make the point about the unions defending these players and letting them know when there'll be a piss test so they don't test positive for steroids, even though they're doing it, and what harm that does, putting steroids in your body. And I realize the money involved, and I can't say that for $12 million a year I wouldn't put stuff in my body that, well, I can say that, that I would not put certain things in your body. Steroids have an incredibly bad effect on one's vital organs, to the point where it's under-publicized. So the unions acting in the player's best interest, quote unquote, just doesn't happen. And that's the real decline of it all, where the unions are in cahoots with management to cheat, to cover up, to lie, to just extend people's careers money-wise, and not their lives, not their longevity. I mean, if the unions would have done something with smokeless tobacco back when Bill Tuttle was, I think it was Bill Tuttle, he was an outfielder with Kansas City.
They might not have buried Tony Gwynn this weekend.
Exactly. If the unions would have taken a stand, oh no, we got a contract with this, that, and the other thing. We can't interfere with their rights. That's right. You bury a man in his 50s for doing something that is so addictive, much more so than actually smoking the tobacco. If you could imagine more addictive than that, it's a pity. It's a pity, not just the players' unions, but how the unions were weakened by Reagan and the flight unions, and how that affects all of us, the working people. We're in a situation I never thought I'd live long enough to see it be so fucked up. To be
well, you asked me my best spring training memories, and there's a whole bunch of them. In all honesty,
sorry for the rambling. Give me a few more.
When I came down here to see the Braves, one time I was visiting my grandparents. I was only down for a couple of days. It was in April. I was on spring break from Atlanta. And I said, I'm going to, go up into the Braves game. And it was like a Sunday afternoon, and I didn't even think about it. I was like 16, 17 years old. And I went by myself up to the stadium, and it was mobbed because it was, a gorgeous day out, 80 degrees, I said, well, I'll see, there's a huge line for tickets. I was like, man, maybe I'll see if I can get one from a scalper. And at that moment that I made that decision, some older gentleman next said, hey, man, you looking for one ticket? I said, yeah, what do you want for it? He said, I'll just sell it to you for face value. He said, my business partner couldn't make it to the game today. I said, all right, whatever. Turns out, so I'm sitting next to this guy. Turns out he is the vice president of Anheuser-Busch, and his ticket is right in the owner's box, and I was sitting next to Ted Turner. And during the game, John, we're in the front row, right on top of the dugout, and John Sherholtz, comes over, and I actually sat during one inning and just had a long conversation with John Sherholtz, the Braves general manager, about building a team and stuff like that. That was a really, really cool experience with the Braves, and
very, very cool.
With the Cardinals, it is, and with the Cardinals, we've got now. I got one really good one. Years ago, back when I was in college, the Cardinals had just come down here for they'd only been here in the area for a few years, maybe a year or two, and I was working in retail because I was a college student, and it was horrible. And at one point, guy comes, tall, skinny guy comes in and he's shopping in the store I was working at, and he's very distinctive looking, and actually out in the Bay Area, you guys would know him too, Willie McGee.
Oh, yes.
I was like,
Pittsburgh, California.
Oh, yeah. I was checking out. He was with the Cardinals, and I said, you're Willie McGee, aren't you? He's like, yeah, man. How you doing? I was like, working. And I was like, he said, you busy tomorrow? I said, no, I'm off. He's like, here's a couple of tickets to the game. So, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
That is very cool. Willie McGee helped the Giants win. He
and the Cardinals.
that was a super team. That was a super Cardinal team. They played the Mets so many years. They were so good. They played the Cardinals a lot. You had Coleman and Whitey Herzog, who is perhaps the most underrated guy in terms of his influence on having built that first Met team.
Yeah.
He was an original scout and coach for the original Mets, and he helped build that first 69 team. They did it in 7 years. They went from being a laughingstock, and Whitey Herzog had a lot to do with it. Besides doing well with the Angels, one of my favorite teams in the world, especially in the American League. I can't think of the team, maybe the A's that I like a little more than the Angels. He was great with the Angels and both the Cardinals and Kansas City. He had a terrific career, a very underrated guy.
And just over the years, I've met so many, because during spring training, so many retired players come down with teams that they're still associated with and do some, community events and stuff like that. But just being in the neighborhood, in the area, not going to any specific events, but I've just in public, I've run into Hank Aaron, Lou Brock, Red Shandies. Got Hall of Famers, the Mets are an hour north of here in Port St. Lucie. And
I know they are.
I was up there watching practice back when I was doing some work for the newspaper. And, there's not a whole lot to do watching practice. You're basically, waiting for something to happen to write about. And I was sitting and watching the pitcher stretch on a backfield, and guy comes and sits down next to me, and he starts talking, and we're chatting, and I swear we're talking for 5 minutes before it suddenly dawns on me that I'm sitting here having a conversation with Tom Seaver.
Who originally was drafted by the Braves. Tom Seaver. The deal was nixed for one. I don't remember the reason, and he got into some draft, and the Mets ended up drafting him. Right. But he was ticketed for the Braves right away. Another guy, in Northern California guy, owns wine vineyards up in Napa at this point. I sat there talking to Tom Seaver for an hour, and he told me about how in '81. He got jobbed out of the Cy Young Award because he finished second in the voting. I'm sure you remember who won the Cy Young in '81. Right off the top of my head, I don't. Southern California. It was Valenzuela. Yes, Valenzuela. That was '81. Wow. Holy Toledo, that's 40 years ago. Things are going a little faster than this old guy would have enjoyed them to have. But, there's a man who made a big impression on Southern California. The perfect guy. Big Mexican community in Los Angeles, big Latin community, and they just ate him up. He was probably 35 when he came up. And Seaver told me how in '81 he finished second in the voting, and he did. He was 3 total points. Not first place votes, but 3 points behind Valenzuela. And apparently, what really pissed Seaver off was the 2 Los Angeles writers left him off the ballot completely. Not even a second place vote, a third place vote. Exactly. Clearly, everybody else thought he and Valenzuela were 1 and 2 in some order, because they both got 8 first place votes. So everybody thought that they were 1 and 2. See, when something like that comes to light, voters should decide voting from there on in. Yeah, and the 2 guys from L.A.
didn't vote for him at all, left him completely off the ballot. If they had put him in second place, or even if they'd put him in fifth place, maybe not fifth, but if they'd put him in second, third, or fourth, he would have won the Cy Young over Fernando. Yeah. So he was a little bitter about that.
I can well imagine. Now, I'm still a little bitter when M. Donald Grant, they used to call him M. Donald Duck, took over the Mets when Mrs. Whitney died and just simply traded him off for 4 or 5 guys that just didn't pan out. You traded the franchise.
Cincinnati, right?
To Cincinnati for Doug Flynn and.
The Mets have a long history of that, though.
They don't have a very good history of many things. It's been
right. Well, you remember that one. I remember the Mets trading Lenny Dykstra and Roger McDowell for Juan Samuel.
And I remember them trading McGraw for a pretty good catcher, and I can't think of his name right now, but it was Tug frickin' McGraw, and the trade in Tug McGraw, there are things you don't do.
Right.
Yeah, that like trading Dyke, and how quickly that 86 team just blew up, and how that should have been a dynasty for years and years.
Well, I think 88. They thought they were going back to the series, and then they ran into Oral Hershiser. Right,
and Pedro Guerrera too is one of stands out in my mind as somebody who beat them very, very handedly in 88.
In that series. But but then again, the Braves traded Dale Murphy for Jim Vatcher and Jeff Parrott, because both of those guys went on to long and distinguished major league careers.
As we know, next show we'll debate whether or not they get into the Hall of Fame.
Yes, of course, obviously, yeah.
Maybe they can go in as a tandem. Probably not. Hey, Zach, this is terrific. I hope you'll come back. And before we go, any observations about this year's season? We're almost at the halfway point. I think we've got about 80 more games to play. Anything that shocks you, that surprises you, that any prognosis for you'd like to make, predictions?
Well, I mean, I think maybe it's finally the year for Oakland.
Okay.
I mean, they're just killing people.
That they are doing that, and
they're just killing people.
After losing 2 pitchers to that aforementioned Tommy John surgery.
Well, the Braves did the same thing. They lost 2 of them in 3 days in spring training. And
here's something that's really interesting. Oakland didn't sign Hudson, and the Braves did. And now when Hudson comes back to the Bay Area, he's still Tim Hudson. He's a bulldog.
Yeah.
He's doing very well with the Giants.
And I understand, was I sorry to see Hudson leave the Braves? I was, but at the time, and of course I'm saying, everything, you have to take every decision as being of its time. The decision the Braves made essentially not to bring Hudson back. They extended him a qualifying offer, but he declined it. Made a lot of sense. The guy is in his late 30s. He was coming off a brutal ankle injury that I think may have made the difference in the Braves' postseason, quite frankly. He's coming off a bad ankle injury. He's in his late 30s. The Braves at the time, keep in mind, didn't know that they were going to lose 2 starting pitchers in spring training. And even with those 2 starting pitchers gone, 2 frontline guys, their pitching staff has been tremendous this year. So it didn't make sense to give a guy in his late 30s a long-term, multi-million-dollar deal when you've got all this young pitching coming in the pipeline. What the Braves really need is a bat, because God knows they signed, they've got like $27 million committed to Dan Uggla and B.J. Upton this year, and combined, I had almost as good a year as they did, and I'm not in the major leagues.
You don't even know anybody from Hooters anymore, which really...
Yeah. So, the Braves needed a bat more than they thought they needed pitching. As it turns out, they had to go out and sign Irvin Santana, who's been fine for them. But at the time the decision made sense, you don't want to sink... We just talked about how you don't want to sink all your money into pitching as unreliable as it can be.
Right. So you think the Braves have a shot this year? We'll make it a brave prognosis. If B.J. Upton can get it turned around and the hitting can start happening. You keep waiting for the hitting to start. They've got the pitching. There's no doubt. They've got the pitching to get there. But their bats are just too inconsistent. You've got a couple of guys having big years. Freeman's a stud. He's going to be there for a long time. Gaddis came out of, nowhere. Everyone knows the Evan Gaddis story by now. But I have him in my fantasy league, and he didn't play today. There was a doubleheader. He didn't play the game. Is he hurt? Yeah. Friday he left. He struck out in his first at bat and left with back spasms. So they're trying to just let him work through that and hopefully not have to put him on the DL. Good. But he's a catcher, and even a great catcher is only going to give you 130 games a year. No question, right. And I think if they can get the hitting solidified right now, I was looking at this earlier today. It's kind of a crazy statistic. I talked about how this looks like Oakland's year. Oakland, you know what they're doing. They're right by you, but their run differential is plus 134. I mean that's killing people. They've scored 134 more runs than they've allowed. That's berserk. Right. The Braves, and they have a great bullpen too. They really do have even Johnson not doing well. They have a great bullpen. Doolittle and Cook, and they're super. The Braves, they're legitimate. Are tied for first place with Washington right now, and quite frankly, over the past couple of years, they have owned Washington. But the Braves' run differential, they're the only first place team in Major League Baseball right now that has a negative run differential. Their run differential is -1, but they're in first place. So I'm thinking if they've managed to scratch and claw and keep and maintain good position in the division, if the bats get hot, they haven't had that hot streak yet. If the bats get hot, they may be able to really take off. Right. Well, Justin Upton is doing very well. Yeah, he's been solid all year. Hayward's finally starting to come around, but it's the Braves, and 14 division titles and 1 World Series win. That's kind of like you don't want to get your hopes up. You don't want to get your hopes up, but they did win that World Series. Yes. Yep. I mean, that's the one thing you can. I mean, if they don't win that series, I don't think Cox gets inducted. No, I don't. I agree with you. Yeah, but they did. Off going, but they did, and he is, and next year Smoltz. Yep, next year Smoltz, and you know who else? I mean, the biggest travesty, in all honesty, forget Murphy. Forget some guys that haven't been inducted yet that should be, just because people say, oh, well, they played during the steroid era, even though there's no evidence or accusations or anything out there. Guys who should qualify, like Piazza and Bagwell. And whether you think they did it or not, there's not even any smoke. So how can you suggest there's a fire? Right. But the guy who absolutely deserves to be in there, and for some reason there's no movement to get him in there at all, is Tim Raines. Yeah, Tim Raines. Tim Raines lost a kidney or gave a kidney to someone, if I remember correctly. I don't know, but Tim Raines was an ungodly good player. I mean, not good. He was an ungodly great player. Well, the reason he doesn't get it, he played up in Montreal.
Because he played in Montreal.
Right.
Because he played in Montreal.
Right.
And
that's why I said if the Braves played in New York, they'd be having parades for the memory of that team. They'd be bringing guys back for old timers. Every year it would be just 14 division titles. I mean, they were hurt publicity-wise. So I wonder what it would have been. I wonder what it would have been like if Murphy had been in the middle of the Yankee lineup or some other lineup that would have protected him. I guess that's...
But, Raines his numbers actually compare to Tony Gwynn's favorably. He didn't have the batting average, but he didn't have the batting average, but he walked a lot more, stole a lot more bases, had a lot more power. It's... Yeah,
come to think about it, he was a very solid ball player.
Oh, my God, yeah. His career numbers, he had an 810 OPS, which is, that's
phenomenal.
And
for a guy who's thought about with the speed that he had, that's phenomenal.
His career stolen bases, he had 808 stolen bases against only 146 caught stealing, so he was almost a 75% stolen base guy. I mean, he was just a dynamite player and just never got the credit he deserved because he played up in Montreal.
I'm glad you brought that out. Hey, we're running up against it. I want to keep these segments within the realm of listenability for folks who are getting accustomed to hearing kind of a different way of looking at things on the radio. As you may know, not speaking of sports, I fight the unholy trinity, what I call the unholy trinity of big business, organized religion, and government. Is there anything as a young family person, raising a child, living in the United States of America, anything along the lines of the unholy trinity that is particularly irking you as we speak? Is it getting back into another war with Iraq? Anything that you come up with?
Oh, absolutely. It's the misbegotten reform of education agenda that just drives me nuts. Because that's a meeting essentially of corporate interest and government, and you even organize religion when you consider how many places seem to think that science involves people hanging out with dinosaurs.
You're right. That says it beautifully. And they are conspiring to kill us. We are just, big business is taking their armaments and keeping wars going on a regular basis that takes money out of social programs. That,
of course.
Contributes to not making children school ready. There's no preschool stuff going on. And on top of that, they're screwing up the ecology from the water to the air. And drilling and fracking and I'm 67. I lived through the 50s when there was a lot of tension going on with Russia and the Cold War and all this. It wasn't a peaceful time. There was the McCarthy era and what have you. I have never seen it this bad on so many different levels, and I'm just it's almost exhausting to rant like I do, but
well, what we've got is a situation.
Tell me something where you see hope for the future, where you can see something positive that to help me get through at least the next 45 minutes.
Some positive hope for the future. I think some positive hope for the future. I'm not a huge fan of Democrats, but I'm I'm much less of a fan of the Republicans right now. I think the conservative movement, which is basically against everything, including rational thought, is really what the real problem in this country seems to be. People whose whole ethos tends to be mine, you can't have any. But I think the fact that the Republican Party may have gerrymandered themselves long-term control of Congress, but the fact that if they can continue in the direction that they're going, they're turning off more and more young people, more and more minorities, women, that they're going to eventually piss people off and to the point where they are themselves are a non-entity. Because, nothing personal, but there's only so many old white guys in the world, in the country,
Right. And it's going down on a fairly regular basis.
Right. And the one aspect of our government that people undervalue, and by undervalue I mean people don't understand how important and how powerful it is the Supreme Court.
I was going to say, yeah.
And
it's so iffy when a president makes an appointment. It's so iffy. How is this person going to turn out and vote in the future? They tend to change one.
Given the fact, but you know what? That happened once in the last 20-plus years. In the last 25 years, there's really only been one Supreme Court justice who was nominated by a president and then tended to vote the opposite way from that administration, and that was David Souter. And basically, after George H.W. Bush put Souter on the court, and he immediately became essentially a liberal vote who occasionally went as a swing vote to the conservative side. The conservatives were so horrified by that everybody they've nominated since has been hardcore right wing. And unfortunately, Democratic presidents, of which we've had, two in the last 20 years, have responded to that essentially by nominating, solidly conservative, solidly liberal justices, because everyone's afraid of nominating the one that goes the other way. So I think that our current Supreme Court, which has a primarily conservative bent, has ruled in many cases in ways that help the 1% at the expense of the 99%. But given the changing demographics of the country, while Republicans may maintain at the very least solid minorities, but likely majorities in Congress, the fact that it's going to be very difficult for a Republican to win a national election, in other words, the presidency. If you look at what's out there,
they're as polarized as they are polarized with themselves as they are with the Democratic Party.
Exactly. The Republicans don't even trust each other at this point.
Right.
And I think it's going to be very, very hard for them to win the presidency in 2016, and 2020 is a long way away. We'll see what happens. But even in 2016, and what I hope is the case, we all know that a lot of the justices have a tendency to hang on until a president of the same party that nominated them is in office. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yes.
Maybe you'll see some of the current conservative justices, obviously not Roberts or Alito, who have both been there for a relatively short period of time. But
or even Kennedy can hang in for another 20 years, for crying out loud.
Right.
Kennedy.
But you might see Scalia or Thomas find that it's time to retire and hang it up. Of course, the nightmare is that there's a Republican president and Ginsburg needs to leave the bench. That's everybody's nightmare. But what Kennedy's the swing vote. Kennedy I can live with, but Scalia is so conservative that he is opposed to, Are you there?
Yeah, anything.
Okay.
Yes, of course. He's opposed to anything that involves change in any way.
Right. And so I'm hoping that he was put on the bench by Reagan. Clarence Thomas was put on the bench by H.W. Bush. So we're already talking 20 to 30 years for these guys. So I kind of hope that maybe one of them will be coming up on retirement age, and there's a Democrat in the White House at that point.
Hey, you're a teacher.
That's the only thing that I see as That's the only hope that I see, quite frankly.
You're a teacher and a family man, and you have incredible personal. What's the word I'm looking for? You're not tainted in any way. Have you ever considered politics, local politics?
I've considered it, but the problem with politics is it's much, much easier to run for office if you don't have a job. And if you can pay, if you can pay your bills without having to go to work, so to speak.
Right.
And
because it's a full-time job becoming elected. Exactly.
Campaigning is a full-time job. So I just the thought has occurred to me to run for office, but I can't not have an income to support my family while I'm campaigning. So if anything ever changes on that front, absolutely I would consider it. But until such time,
for no other reason, we're looking for election reform because you're young, you have opinions without being opinionated, which is very important. You're pleasant, you get along with people, and you're incredibly articulate. So hope things change. I hope things change along those lines where we have total election reform and we get some people in there like yourself. And it's my privilege to have you as a guest. I hope you'll come back, and I hope you had fun.
I certainly did, and I would be delighted to come back sometime.
Oh, that's terrific. Say hello to your mom and dad, and who have been guests on this show before. I have a little family going here, which is really kind of nice, and I plan to be a Floridian as well as a Californian, maybe even a Floridian full-time if things go as planned in the next months coming up. And we'll see each other, and hug that beautiful little daughter of yours, if you would, for me.
Will do.
All right, and I'm going to sign off on this segment as I do on most of the ones that I've had on this show. I want to implore you and all of your guests to keep your dreams wet and your humor dry. Keep your kids off the laps of military of clerics wearing dresses, and keep your kids out of military recruiting offices at all costs. So if you could do all that, especially keep your kid off the laps of clerics. If you need daycare, that's not the way to go. It's been in all the papers. It's a little boys' club. It's not fun. And if you got it in you to write a letter to the powers that be, write a letter in favor of churches and synagogues and mosques, every religion that's organized. Let them pay taxes. Don't make it a bit. That would be great. If that could happen, and if the powers that be make that happen for me in my lifetime, it would change a lot of things. It would free up a lot of bucks, and we need to be less oil dependent and more dependent on the sun and the wind, and not get involved in every frickin' war that goes on and bumfuck Egypt from here to there. We're not policemen. And we're not, the country wasn't put into being to support big business and have them not pay taxes at all. It's a tax-based business, and election reform, all that good stuff. Thanks for being here. Sorry I rambled so much. I got so much out of having you as a guest. This was terrific. You'll come back.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
All right. Over and out, everybody. Keep them flying. Oh, yeah, the last thing. Keep on keeping on. You got to keep doing those things, and you got to keep on keeping on. Be well, everybody, and thanks a lot, man. See you soon.